Welcome to another episode of Three Thought Podcast. And now we have a brand new mic, so this is just getting better and better. So we just
hopefully
climbing the ladder of the podcast. We're coming for you, Joe Rogan.
Hopefully it's gonna sound better. From now on.
It should be, or else I want my money back.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we know a lot of people have been waiting for this particular episode after our technical difficulties during the last week in the midterm elections.
Yeah, exactly.
And we haven't had, how do you say?
Ever since we haven't had any problems sort of recording our episodes.
Yeah.
But it also wasn't due to the fact that we stayed up all night and we had really tried to get the best out of the best knowledge possible out of this election, get the facts straight and everything, and then just got hit with with some difficulties at the last minute. But yeah, now we're back and we're gonna talk some midterm election.
Yeah, and for you who might not know, the midterm election is something that's held every 4 years, and it's between the presidential election. So that means that there's not a president up for election, but every 2 years the entire House is up for election, both on the presidential election and in the midterm. So all the seats are up for grasp in the midterm. And 1/3 of the seats in the Senate is up for election. They are up for election every 6 years. And then there's also a lot of other elections, such as governor elections around the country. And there's also some ballot initiatives in some certain states where they can vote directly on a certain issue. And
I just thought that maybe we should explain what the people sitting in the House, who are they representing? We just to explain it to the listeners that may not know what the difference between a representative and a senator is.
Well,
just to shortly explain.
Yeah.
Well, the House, there's 535 members, if I remember correctly, in the House. And it is determined on the population size of the state. So, for example, California is the largest state, and so they have over 50 something House representatives. I'm not entirely sure. I don't have the numbers in front of me. And then you got some smaller states where they only have one House of Representatives because the population is a lot smaller.
So it ties into the amount of citizens in said state.
Yeah.
So, for example, a state like California has a large populations, which means they have a larger a bigger amount of representatives in the House. For example, in contrast to a state like, let's say, Wyoming, for example, because their population is smaller. So it's more like they represent the amount of people in said state.
Yeah.
Also, just a small correction, it was 435 people in Congress. That's with Senate.
Yes.
It's 435 in the House of Representatives. And with 100 senators, you got 535 in entire Congress.
Yeah.
But the role of the House is the people who make legislation. So they are the people who is going to write some sort of legislation that they're going to vote for, then it's going to the Senate, and then the president has to, either confirm it by giving a signature or
he can veto it. Yeah.
Exactly, unless the Senate has a 2/3 majority to override the president's veto.
Exactly.
And that's basically the House also has some other aspects. They have some other powers they can use, which I will think we will go into later in greater detail because it gets a bit complex. But the senators has a lot more to do in terms of appointment of sort of judges and Supreme Court judges and so on. And they are a lot more in check with the president. They can override his veto with a 2/3 majority. And because they are only re-elected every 6 years, there's a lot more power in being a senator.
You're not so you don't have to be so I wouldn't say dedicated, but they don't have to be in touch so much with the people as the representatives are, because they, as you said, they are up every 6 years for elections, so they have more place or more to play from. But we also you shortly mentioned that the senators, each state have 2 senators, which are in the House. So
what is it? The Senate, you mean?
they are. Not in the House. They are in the Senate, and they are more directed towards the president. So it's sort of what can you say? It's more of a ladder, not a ladder, staircase, sort of. You have the House.
Not entirely, because I'm pretty sure in theory the House is supposed to be the most Congress is supposed to be the most powerful branch in government.
Yeah.
You got the executive branch, which is the president. You got the legislative branch, which is Congress, and then you got the judicial branch, which is the courts and the Supreme Court. You normally think about it in that sense, but it's basically all of the courts. And the House and Senate, they have different jobs and priorities, where the House are always voting for what kind of, let's say we are going to vote for a single-payer healthcare system. That's something that will start in the House, and then it will go up to the Senate, and they will vote for it, and then the president will, either veto it or sign it into law.
Yeah.
But the senator has a lot more control over the president than the House has. However, when the president do not have control over the House, it's very difficult to get any legislation done because of this bipartisanship we have talked about in last episode. So they're supposed to work together. It's basically a system.
Yeah.
Yeah, they couldn't have foreseen that they would have a two-party system, which would eventually actually be the polar opposites of each other.
Yeah, exactly. It was built with its intent on keeping only one party at all time, but pretty early on it split into 2 parties, and they sort of but that is a whole nother that's more of a historical context to it.
Yeah, and it's only in the last 20 or 30 years or something where the bipartisanship had gone completely out of control. Before that, people actually used to work together over the aisle with Republicans and Democrats, and there weren't this entire bipartisanship gridlock as we know today.
Yeah. I mean, even when you look at the Supreme Court, I mean, you could just see how the different justices are somehow affiliated to a party.
This has also been completely politicized.
Yeah.
And the Supreme Court was supposed to be a completely neutral branch of the government, because they're supposed to interpret the law. But if you look at people who have been appointed by Republican presidents, they basically always vote in a conservative way.
Yeah.
And people who have been appointed by a Democratic president always vote in a sort of liberal ways. There's an overlap where some people kind of is in between, but as time has gone, it's less and less, and the court is now also basically a political structure.
Yeah,
exactly.
I mean, you had to remember the justices in the Supreme Court, their only power is to actually interpret laws and to define if that law is contradictory to the Constitution.
Yeah,
that's the only objective.
Yeah,
but that might sound like they do not have a lot of power, but that's not what Denne is talking about. They actually have a lot of power, because when they make a ruling, unless they say this is not supposed to be president, that ruling is actually going to be law.
Yeah.
So, for example, gay marriage, was a ruling from the Supreme Court back in 2015, with a court ruling back in, I believe, in California. I don't remember what it was, which went over to the state court, and then all the way up to the federal court, and then at the end up to the Supreme Court, which is the highest court. And when the Supreme Court ruled that it's unconstitutional to deny gay marriage to these people, it became law in the entire U.S. So now gay marriage is legal in the entire of America, which it wouldn't have been if they hadn't made a ruling out. So they have a lot of power. It's not a small branch; it's a pretty huge one, and that's actually a problem when we're talking about the polarization of the court, because depending on how the court is stacked, depending on conservative or liberal judges, it can actually have a huge effect of how society is going to go forward in terms of law and what is going to be legal and not legal. A big issue at the moment, because now it's a conservative Supreme Court where Trump has got 2 Supreme Court nominees into the court. People are fearing that abortion might be illegal soon.
Yeah.
And they were going to turn back Roe versus Wade, which made abortion legal in America.
Yeah, and all of this is a problem because, as mentioned earlier, because the Supreme Court was supposed to be totally unbiased.
Yeah, neutral.
Yeah.
Yeah, things have changed.
Yeah, they have.
But that's also interesting that the polarization have become so. How can you say it? It has become so. It's such a game to who is going to win this and who can out veto who, and who can stop the other person from getting anything through. Right. Also, why it is so important to have the discussion about the influence of the midterm elections, because as we're going to touch upon later in the podcast, the House actually shifted, and people are talking about how now. The Democrats can stop Trump from doing anything at all.
They can't stop him from doing anything at all.
No, but they sort of hope that now they have brought an end to his. That is actually that is what they sort of touched upon in some of the news stations like CNN and MSNBC. Like now the Democrats can stop Trump, but. We're going to touch upon it later on.
There's some truth in it.
Yeah, there is some truth in it. But
we will talk about it when we come to the House. But I think let's start about the ballot initiatives.
Yeah, because there was some interesting ballot initiatives.
There was. And
so just shortly, ballot initiative.
Ballot initiatives is when you have something up for a vote in a particular state, or it could also be federal. But that's where you have a certain issue that the people vote on directly. So it's basically a direct democracy in some sense.
Yeah.
And some of the ballot initiatives that we found most interesting, there were a lot more than that, but we could go on all day if we are going to talk about all of them. But for example, there was a Medicaid expansion in 4 states we had to vote on it, and it went through in Idaho, Nebraska, and Utah, and it failed in Montana. And if we look at what Medicaid is, it's basically there's 2 federal Medicaid/Medicare systems in America. Medicare is for people older than 65 who, when they do not have to get medical insurance, they're basically insured throughout the state. And Medicaid is supposed to be an insurance system for people in high poverty areas, or if they do have some kind of disability. And so for Idaho, Nebraska, and Utah, for voting for an expansion of Medicaid, they basically voted that the Medicaid should be expanded to even more people who are living in poverty. So even more people in poverty is going to be insured because they cannot afford their own Medicare insurance.
Yeah.
And the reason it didn't pass in Montana is actually quite interesting, because they also put some tobacco tax on it, which was supposed to fund it.
Yeah.
And first of all, many Americans are not so fond of taxes, but there was also a huge backlash or anti-campaign against this Medicaid expansion by tobacco industries that said you shouldn't vote for it because there's a lot of money in politics, and tobacco industries will lose a lot of money if taxes were going up on their products, so they tried hard to not getting this passed.
Obviously.
It is also interesting that they sort of put this tobacco tax on the ballot because as people may experience in many situations when the American when they try in America to get something through like in this case the Medicaid, they sort of, if there is a percentage of the people who, for example, I could imagine just that the Republicans didn't want the expansion of the Medicaid area, they sort of put this tobacco tax on it just to sort of switch people's opinion on the Medicaid. So it's not that people don't want the Medicaid. It is maybe that the people don't want. Yeah, they don't want the taxes on the tobacco to support it in some kind of way.
And that's actually a great point. That's one of the thing about politics, especially in America, that programs like Medicaid and Medicare are that and Social Security are the most popular programs in US period.
Yeah.
So it's not because these programs are unpopular or they do not want them to be expanded, but as Casper was talking about, a lot of legislators, they could put another thing into this vote which will make it less lucrative for people to actually vote for it.
Exactly.
So they decide to vote against it because of these things, which is a way for Republicans who might be against Medicaid expansion to actually get it to not pass.
Yeah, it's sort of like if you have to have a metaphor for it, it's like a Trojan horse from the Republicans, right? Because the main objective is that they know this is a popular opinion, that Medicare is actually something that expansion of Medicare is something that is hugely popular in the U.S. And in order to kind of make it, like Baba said, it less attractive, you have to put something that's something like taxes, which is really unpopular in the U.S.
Exactly. Yeah.
So in a historical context, right?
Yeah, yeah. As you said, it's like this Trojan horse.
Yeah.
But one can experience it in all of American politics. It's almost always there when something is on the ballot, just to make sure that the other side doesn't vote for it.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons these ballot initiatives is very interesting from our point of view is that the midterm election, the biggest issue that people were voting for was healthcare. And that's probably also going to be the same. That's going to be the top priority in 2020. That's probably also going to be healthcare. And that's why this particular incident is very interesting, as Medicaid have been expanded in three areas, whereas it had been, it didn't pass in Montana. But there are also some other ballot initiatives that I find very interesting. One in Florida, for example, which it's called Amendment 4, which have given voting rights back to people who have been convicted of a felony. And a lot of people do not know this, but in America, there's a lot of states where if you have been convicted of a felony and you have a criminal record, you are not allowed to vote anymore, even after you have been released from jail. And that's a big problem because they're basically just taking voting rights from citizens who have served their time, so they cannot participate in the political process.
And we could actually talk about this in a larger perspective, because this may be going a little off track, but a lot of the states in the southern districts, but in the southern states have a lot of problems with incarceration of a lot of minorities and black people in general, and a lot of these people come out of the system or jail without a chance to vote afterwards, and this ballot initiative is actually interesting because now they have a chance to sort of not right the wrong, but they have a chance to sort of get back into the whole voting process and be a part of the American system once more. In its completeness.
Yeah, the whole thing about removing the voting right from previous convicts is actually a pretty serious offense into democracy, if you ask me, because the whole point about going into jail and to be punished for your felonies and I realize this is somehow of a controversy, because it's not the same thing like it is in Denmark, where you look at the jail system as somewhere as rehabilitation. which means you have to become a better person after you serve jail. Where in the U.S. there is a different attitude towards punishing convicts, where it's more about actually punishing these people and to let them know that what they did was wrong, and you should never even, and never be forgiven for it. That's the attitude in the U.S. and that's why you see a law like this coming. When a law like this coming to happen, is actually a pretty significant change of interest, where people are beginning to realize, well, maybe this should still have that road.
Yeah, exactly.
And just a small caveat to this vote they were voting on. It goes for all felonies except for murders and people who have a felony of sexual offense or sexual assault of some sort. So it's not everybody who is allowed to vote. But this is also one of the key aspects, as Denne was talking a little bit about. It's a problem in terms of democracy because drugs is a felony in America. Sort of marijuana is also a felony because it's categorized as Schedule 1 drug. That means that if you have been caught with a possession of marijuana, you get a felony, and you're actually not allowed to vote just because you had weed on you. And it's a huge problem, especially in poor areas where they cannot fight back. So they're actually losing their voting rights and losing their ability to participate in democracy. And it's basically a form of voter suppression. And now that Florida have passed this, I believe it's between 80,000 to 100,000 people who get the right to vote back. And that's going to affect a lot in the coming years for Florida, because Florida is a swing state. And a lot of these people are probably voting Democratic because many of them are African American or minorities.
Yeah, and especially when you think about the 3 strikes and you're out rule, which is basically a rule that ensures if you convicted of crime 3 times, it doesn't matter what kind of crime. If you've been convicted of a crime 3 times, then you're in jail for your whole life.
Well, it has to be a felony. It cannot be a misdemeanor. But as Dennis said, a felony could be something as marijuana possession.
Yeah.
It's not something like jaywalking or something that's a misdemeanor. But that's still,
exactly.
As Dennis is talking about, it's a huge problem because you're not focusing the entire jail system of rehabilitation. You're just focusing on punishment.
Exactly.
Totally. And also, to be more clear, imagine if you were convicted of murder the first time, then the second time it was something gang related, and you actually rehabilitated from this, and then you ended up just smoking marijuana on the third time.
Yeah.
Then you're in for life, and you can't get out, and your vote is totally gone.
And you might have been honorary citizen for like 10 years before your last conviction, and then you're caught with marijuana possession and you're in jail for life.
And the greatest paradox of this is this was something that was done by the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
That's one of the greatest backfires I ever experienced when I researched the different laws in the United States.
At what time period did this happen?
Bill Clinton.
Yeah, it was Bill Clinton, right?
Yeah, it was Clinton.
Yeah.
So, he has mentioned that it is one of the things that he has actually regretted the most, because he realized that he did more damage than good.
And when we're talking about Bill Clinton, he's an interesting example because he ran as a New Democrat, as he called it, which is basically a more conservative Democrat, because at that time he was probably also white, but you could not win being very liberal or leftist Democrat. You had to run as an conservative, tough-on-crime Democrat. And that is why Bill Clinton made this 3 strikes you're out rule, and he was extremely tough in the criminal justice reforms, and it has basically ruined the life of thousands and other thousands of Americans, especially minorities.
Yeah, definitely.
But it also it's sort of as we also talked about before, it's sort of a win for democracy that these previously criminals they have served their sentence and now they're out. And as Barbara also mentioned, it's not people who are in for murder or sexual assaults. It's we could say lesser crimes, like possession of marijuana.
Yeah, mostly
So
crimes, or maybe I don't know if driving while drinking or something is a felony.
Yeah.
But we could say that it's sort of America moving towards a more rehabilitation of the felons.
Perhaps.
And
I'm
I
not
hope
so
so.
sure. Yeah, I hope so.
But
And
even if you talk about when it comes to murders or sexual misdemeanors, I still think that you still have to be able to recover from that, and if you can, that would be the optimal choice, right?
You could say that from case to case, it would be up to the judges and the justice system to see if, for example, you could have the idea that someone was had killed a person in a driving accident. Is that direct murder, or is it an accident? And in that case, should the person lose his or her right to vote when they have when they are finished serving their sentence?
Mm-hmm.
But then again, it's a case to case topic.
Yeah, and when we're talking about marijuana and felonies in that terms, it's also interesting to see that in 4 states they were voting for either medical legalization of marijuana or just full-on legalization.
Yeah, exactly.
And in Michigan, they voted and passed a full-on legalization for recreational marijuana. That means that you are allowed to.
Yeah,
you are allowed to smoke marijuana. You are allowed to smoke it basically anywhere without being stopped. And Missouri, Utah, they voted for medical marijuana, and that also passed, which has been in a lot of states now. I don't know how many states have passed medical marijuana.
Yeah, it's sort of being popular on the whole ballot thing.
Yeah, and that's basically a trend over the last 6 years or so, that marijuana has been increasingly more and more popular in legalization.
Yeah.
But the funny thing is also that it's still illegal on a federal level. So even though it might be legal on a state level, even medical or recreational marijuana, it's still illegal on a federal level. That means that you're actually not allowed to smoke marijuana, not even for medical use, because it's illegal on a federal level.
But that is also a topic which we could discuss, the whole state versus the federal government level.
It's very complex, and we do not have time to go into that today.
No, not this time.
Another issue was gun control. Washington, they voted for harder gun control in their state, so it will be more difficult to get access of a gun, and you have to be at least 21 years of old to buy a firearm now.
Which is also a topic becoming more popular in America due to all the shootings they have
that's
going on.
It's kind of becoming a trend to shoot your fellow classmates.
Yeah, crazy trend.
So now you have to have a license, and you have to be 21 or older to buy a firearm. But
in the state of Washington.
In the state of Washington, but that's also a huge topic, because everybody knows about mass shootings. There was a mass shooting the day after the midterm election, for example. So it happens all the time. That's basically a topic in of it itself. But it's also a huge issue in America, and they are tired of all the gun violence, but it's difficult to do anything about it.
Exactly.
Then in Massachusetts, they voted for some LGBTQ rights, where they voted for an anti-discrimination law, which means that people who identify with a certain gender cannot be discriminated against in restaurants or hotels or so on. It's basically, in some sense, a civil rights issue where you cannot be kicked out of a restaurant for being transgender, for example.
Try to explain the boundary of the law, because that's where I was kind of confused.
Yeah, then when we talked about it pre-production, Dennis was a little confused because he thought it might have been where you are not allowed to mispronounce gender somebody. So if you say something to a person who identifies with a certain gender and you mispronounce her pronoun or his pronoun or whatever, you could be punished. But that's not what the law is. It's basically a civil rights issue.
Yeah.
Huge difference.
Huge difference.
Yeah, huge difference. And then there was a minimum wage increase in Arkansas and Missouri. They voted to increase the minimum wage for $11 in, I believe it was Arkansas, and $12 in Missouri. But exactly. And that's also a big topic that you're also probably going to hear a lot about in the 2020 election, about the minimum wage. It was also a huge topic in the 2016 election, especially on the Democratic side, with Bernie Sanders wanted a $15 minimum wage and Hillary Clinton wanted a $12 minimum wage. But that's basically the ballot initiative we have picked out that we thought was most interesting. There was also a lot of other ballot initiatives, but we do not want to bore everybody about it.
Yeah, we could just mention that we have all the ballot initiatives that we have talked about. There's like many other ballots which can be found in on the websites that we have searched for, and we're gonna leave them in the description of our YouTube channel. If people are interested in knowing which topics were up for the ballot,
and in what states?
In what states they were, because it's becoming more. That's an interesting idea that people are voting directly on these topics, because it's gonna paint a picture of what people are interested in the 2020 election. So when people are discussing, for example, the usage of marijuana, or the idea that the gun control should be stricter, those are topics mainly for the 2020 elections.
And it's pretty interesting to actually see that these are all pretty progressive.
Yeah.
Progressive initiatives.
And as you made a great point about what they're voting for, because things like gun control or marijuana is something that will never go to pass to the federal, state, or Congress, not in this political climate. And as you said, it's a very progressive initiative that have passed. That's basically the argument I always try to make, that America, when you're going down to the specific issues, they are actually very left-leaning, but it's always identity politics and so on that's basically conflicting people, and people are buying into a group instead of into ideas. But when they're allowed to vote on specific issues, they normally actually vote in the last couple of years.
Yeah, but you can definitely get the idea that it isn't like that because of the way the media functions in the US, because it is clearly identity politics.
Completely, I completely agree. They focus too much on this horse race and who said that and so on, instead of actually focusing on what their concerns are. Yeah. And most of the concerns are things like healthcare or criminal justice reform or stuff like that.
So we have talked a little about the ballots, and we're gonna move on directly to what we started the podcast with,
the House,
and talk a little about the midterm elections more closely, and move on to the first point, which is the House, and how that went. I must just say before we start with the results of the and the outcome of the election, that I made last week a prediction that I went to surf on the blue wave idea, and said that both the House and the Senate may fall to the Democratic Party. I was right on the House, because it went to what was it, like 32
they picked
seats?
up 32 seats, yeah.
Yeah, and now they are the majority party in the House, which is it's the first point I was making. But the Senate, which we're going to talk about after the House, I made mistakes. Let's call it that. I predicted something wrong. I was a little quick on the draw.
Well, the House went to the Democrats, and they picked up around 32 seats. And Well, not to brag or anything, I was writing with one of my classmates called Isaac, and I basically predicted that I believe the House they're going to pick up around 30 or maybe a little over 30 seats, and I was correct. But I didn't think they will pick up the Senate, as you talked about, and we're also going to talk about later why they did not pick up the Senate, but Democrats was in a huge disadvantage in the Senate, and that's basically what they only offer re-election every 6 years, and it's only 1/3 of the Senate, but the House is every single seat every 2 years. In the House, you only need 218 seats to get control of the House, and as it stands now, Democrats has around 225, but there's some of the election that's not entirely
that is the whole problem, that they are not actually done
counting finding out who won a district.
Yeah,
and some of them might also be independent, so you cannot put them in one category as Democrat or Republicans, but normally they vote with a certain aisle of either Republicans or Democrats. And do any of you have any thoughts of what it's going to mean that the Democrats now have the House of Representatives?
But yeah, obviously this is a problem for the Republican Party, who had the numbers in the Senate and the House. So it basically means that it's going to get harder for them to get some laws done, to pass them through, right?
Yeah, as we just briefly mentioned in the beginning, that some of the news stations in America, predominantly CNN and MSNBC, mentioned that a majority Democratic House means that right now they can sort of keep some of the ideas that Trump and the Republican Party are putting forth in check, which could be interesting to see. I don't think that is exactly true, but what is your kind of thoughts on, because I don't know what to say on these sort of.
I gotta be honest. I don't think you're going to expect anything's going to happen over the next 2 years, because with the Democrats owning the House or have the majority in the House, they have the legislative branch of the House is winning the legislative laws which have to go up for a vote, and because it's Democratic and the Senate is now is still Republican, basically it's going to be a complete gridlock, if you ask me. I don't think there's any laws coming through over the next 2 years. President Trump cannot get anything through of executive orders, and it's just going to be honest, kind of a shouting match where Democrats are going to blame Republicans for being obstructionist, and vice versa. Republicans are going to blame Democrats for the exact same thing.
Yeah.
And you can say it's definitely a win for Democrats that they have majority in the House, and that was the most important thing we could get out of the election, to stop any new legislation for getting through the Trump administration. But I will not say it's going to be super excited to follow politics for the next 2 years. Because I gotta be honest, I don't think anything is going to happen.
Yeah, and especially because the Democratic Party absolutely hates Trump. I mean, I don't think the word is an over-exaggeration, because they're not going to get anything done, especially with the way that they always contradict each other.
Exactly. Yeah, they're fixated on him as the man they have to stop.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter what he wants to get through. It's more that they want to make sure that he doesn't get anything through at all, because they don't trust him, and they have no interest in working together with a Republican Party that has President Trump as their sort of the man. I would say mascot, because a lot of people today say that the Republican Party has become the party of Trump. So they are so much aligned that you can't say that Trump is not a representative of the Republican Party today, and vice versa.
Yeah.
I will not even go that far. I mean, yes, of course, we hate Trump and we're going to stop Trump. But even if Trump wasn't president, it was one of the middle Republican, a normal Republican president, it will be the same thing, because the hyper bipartisanship is so extreme. Just look at Obama's presidency.
Yeah.
We did the exact same thing with Obama after he lost the House and the Senate. So it's not even has anything to do with Trump, and he's not that different of a president from a Republican side. If you're looking what kind of legislation he has tried to propose or what he is doing with tax cuts and so on, that's just Republican 101. It's more his delivery and some of his executive orders and his outrageous statements that's unusual with Trump.
Yeah.
But it's just going to be 2 years of nothing happening. However, there's also a lot of talk about who is going to be the leader of the House now. And most people think it's going to be Nancy Pelosi. Even Trump, he even wanted to talk with Nancy Pelosi, and he said she should be Speaker of the House, which is kind of funny thing to think about. Why does he want to help a Democrat? Some people believe that it's because she might try to help Trump in some ways instead of a person who's actually going to fight Trump. She's easier to manipulate or something. I don't know. I'm not a fan of Nancy Pelosi, but yeah.
But it could be because that the fact that he or the Republican Party lost the majority in the House, maybe he is seeking allies on the Democratic side because he is first and foremost a business character. He's a businessman, so he knows that right now he's not very popular amongst the Democrats, but that didn't matter when he had the House being almost they were on the Republican side, so it didn't matter that he didn't have a huge backing from the Democrats. Right now the tables have turned, so he has to sort of make some kind of middle ground with a lot of Democrats. So maybe a statement like that is sort of his way to sort of reach out. Not that he's gonna go all Democratic on that front, but that is my thoughts on.
I hear what you're saying, but I actually think you're giving Trump way too much credit. Yeah. I think he's way too impulsive to even try to appease Democrats in any ways to get any allies, because he says whatever he wants or what mood he's in. I mean, every press briefing, he's always attacking the press or people talking critical about him. He cannot stand it. And if any Democrats, he's going to criticize him anyways. He's going to snap at them, even though he's trying to get allies. So I don't believe it's possible for Trump with the character he is. I'm more thinking that he wants a leader of the House or Speaker of the House to be somebody who is not going to fight as aggressive against him as some other people might of the Democrats. And Nancy Pelosi might be a good choice because she's probably not going to be as tough on Trump as some other Democrats might have been if they are going to be the Speaker of the House.
It wouldn't surprise me if it was something that his cabinet has told him, because everything Trump does, I have a kind of observed is when he actually does something that seems to be kind of how do you say reasonable. It's usually just because the cabinet has told him, well, this is probably the smartest move going forward, because you have to remember that Trump is a pretty petty person. Mm-hmm. He really cares about competition, and for me to think that this is something that he came to realize himself, that he maybe had to come to a middle ground with the Democrats. It doesn't really.
That's a great point.
Yeah,
it's a great point, because, as you said, that's why a person like Donald Trump can go up and say these, if we're talking about reasonable things, or it seems like he's actually trying to reach across the aisle, and then the next day he's yelling at the people he tried to give a handout to, because he changes as the wind blows. And as Denne talked about, I also believe that when he is reasonable, it's somebody in his cabinet who told him what to do and what the smartest strategy is, and then the next day he's going on a Twitter rampage on somebody instead.
Yeah, I mean, a perfect example is in the U.S. where when a sports team wins, for example, if the Golden State Warriors win the NBA, they get invited to the White House, like the Philadelphia Eagles. They won. They usually go to the White House to meet the president and get a tour of the White House. But in the recent years, a lot of these teams who have won their domestic leagues, they actually refused to appear in the White House. And obviously, Donald Trump is inviting these teams because it's formality.
Yeah.
And he's probably the only president where these teams are actually declining his invitation. And this is a situation where you can see how petty he becomes, because I think it was Stephen Curry from the Golden State Warriors who actually tweeted that he is declining the White House invitation from Donald Trump. And Donald Trump, in his usual manner, goes onto Twitter and actually says, well, the invitation is withdrawn. You can't come to the White House. And LeBron James immediately supports Stephen Curry and says, well, if he declined your invitation, then that means that you can't withdraw it, you bum. So this is the thing that really makes me wonder sometimes why people may think that Donald Trump is this evil genius who just so good at manipulating people.
Yeah.
So
yeah, we have sort of also talked about the idea that people say that he is this evil genius who conspired with Russia to win the election, but they also say that he is this dumbass who doesn't know right from wrong or left from
narcissistic.
From right. Yeah, a petty person who goes on Twitter wars. So it's sort of like you can't have it both ways. He can be an evil genius and a dumbass at the same time. It's simply not possible in the light of the presidency, because all eyes are on him. You could say that he is this genius who knows how to play a dumbass just to get some... I don't know what you could get out of that, but I mean...
This is, now you're talking about Russia and the Russian investigation. This is actually one of the most interesting thing about Democrats getting a control of the House. And I actually didn't know that before this election. Donald Trump will have, also a little side note, he have just fired his Attorney General Jeff Sessions, who is in control of this investigation of himself.
Yeah, just fired another one.
And he did it a day after the election, so he's probably going to try to shut down the investigation as soon as possible, because he did not want it to be there. He did want to do it before the election. That will be bad optics. People will see right through it. But now, after the election, he can fire Jeff Sessions, and he has done so. But one of the things is he cannot entirely stop. He can stop it in this executive way where he's going to get an attorney general who's actually going to stop the investigation and get something who he can actually control. But the House have the ability now to reopen a lot of other investigation, and all the evidence they have found on Trump in this Russian investigation or his financial ties and so on, they can bring these people in and present the evidence for them, so he cannot hide the evidence that had already been gathered. And we can try to open a lot of new investigation of Trump. I'm not completely sure about the details because it's something I found out very recently. But they can actually try to look in. They have the power to look a lot more into Donald Trump. They have a lot more control over how he's going to be investigated in all sort of terms. So if I was Donald Trump, I would probably be a bit nervous about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially because there are only a certain amount of ways you can actually interpret his actions into this Russia investigation. One thing is pure pettiness. Like I heard this on another podcast where they tried to describe his behavior, and they were only coming to the conclusion that you can look at it in two ways. One thing is he's just so petty that he's so angry when people are targeting him in this Russia investigation, and he's like, I didn't do it. Why the hell can't you leave me alone? That's why he begins firing people.
Yeah.
Or two, he has something to do with it, and then it is obvious.
I actually think there's a third option. I do not believe he had conspired with Russia in this sort of sense, as you talked about. I do not believe he's smart enough to make a whole conspiracy and working with Russia to try to rig the election or whatever. I do not believe he's smart enough to do that. What I believe he's scared about is he probably has a lot of criminal activity in terms of money laundering or tax evasion, and that's the thing he do not want to get out.
But I mean, that is also there was some discussion about Trump using money to pay off people who had something dirty on him in his election, but he used money donated to his campaign. So
that's a crime.
if just some of the allegations that you talk about come up.
That's not even an allegation. That's basically been proven, and that's a crime. But again, it's the House and the Senate that has to impeach him, and that was Republican control.
That was sort of the idea that I was sort of alluding to. That now it is maybe possible for an impeachment talk because you have the House switching to Democrats.
Well,
there was a lot of ideas circling that impeachment should have come just after he was elected, but you had the Republican House and the Republican Senate, which sort of shielded him in some kind of way. But do you think that that's the talk of impeaching him is becoming popular again?
Of course it will, but there's two things. One of the things I think is interesting is if the Democrats are using this power to investigate Trump in all sorts of ways, whether it's financial, this Russia hacking, whatever thing I don't really subscribe to, or basically nepotism in terms of his family and so on, they can investigate him in so many different ways. If they use that power and they find a lot of dirt on Trump or something where it's clear that he has broken with a law or in some sort of thing, that will make a great case for the Democrats. However, for people who do not know how impeachment goes and impeachment of a president is going to occur, is the House of the House of Representatives, which is now Democratic control, who's going to vote for an impeachment of an president. And they can basically do that about anything. They can do it right now if they want to. However, the problem is that when they have voted to impeach the president, they had to go, when the impeachment is going over to the Senate, and you have to have 2/3 majority in the Senate to get the impeachment. You have to get 2/3 of the Senate to get the impeachment of the president. And you can't even get 50% in the Senate because it's Republican control, let alone 2/3. So even talking about an impeachment of President Trump is kind of useless.
You would have to have.
They could do it in the House, but they don't have the Senate to actually vote him out.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that was sort of our ideas on the whole House situation, and it's interesting because there was actually also a lot of talk about the Senate because once again last time we did the podcast, I said that the Senate would switch to the blue Democrats, and it didn't actually. From some of the newest predictions or counts and results, the Democrats actually lost two seats, and what it was to independent. No,
they lost. I can't remember the names. One of them was Joan Donnelly, I believe. He lost to some Republican. They actually lost. They lost 2 Democratic seats in the Senate to Republicans. So Republicans gained 2 seats. I don't know how many independents, if it was only one who was up for election, but as I can already say that the independent candidate who won was Bernie Sanders. But everybody basically knew he would win. and he always voted with the Democrats. So that's basically the same thing.
But the interesting part about the Senate is that there was actually some Senate seats which were fairly close in some of the states. There was a lot of talk. I believe we touched upon it last time in our predictions about the Ted Cruz. Yeah. And I can never say his last name. Beto O'Rourke.
Before we go to that, I just found the stats. In Indiana, Mike Brown won over John Donnelly, I was talking about. He used to be the senator in Indiana. In North Dakota, Kevin Cramer won over Heidi Heitkamp. Yeah. That was also sort of expected because he ran a terrible campaign. And in Missouri, Josh Hawley won over Claire McCaskey, some I actually don't know anything about, to be honest. And basically, Democrats lost some seats in the Senate. But they also gained in Nevada. They gained Jackie Wilson won over Dean Heller, so they lost 2 seats in the election. And Bernie Sanders was an independent who won in Vermont, no surprise there. And in Maine, Angus King he won also as an independent. So there's 2 independent who won in the ways. And I also actually believe there's only 2 independents in the entire Senate. So it's pretty difficult to be independent in American political climate.
So not much of a blue wave, exactly.
Well, let's talk about why that didn't happen, because it wasn't expected for them to.
Well, try to explain what a blue wave is.
Yeah, well, a blue wave is basically this idea that the Democrats will get complete control over Congress. And you can say in the House they did get a blue wave because they got a pretty big lead in the House of Representatives, and they even got more seats than what the polling or people expect them to get. I believe it was around 26 seats they were expecting to get, but they got 32 at least. Some of them are still have not been called yet. But in the Senate, they lost 2 seats and they did not get back the Senate. But the thing about the way you look at it when you're talking about a blue wave, it can be a little bit difficult to say that they did not get a blue wave because they got a pretty big lead in House of Representatives. But the thing about the Senate, they weren't going to win that anyways. It was extremely difficult for them to win the Senate because, as we have talked about, the Senate is up for re-election every 6 years, and it's only 1/3 of the senators that's up for re-election. And this time, the Democrats was in a huge disadvantage. It was 2/3 of all seats were Democratic seats up for re-election, whereas only 1/3 of the seats were. Whereas Republicans were up for re-election. So it was 27 seats up for grabs from the Democrats that the Republican could have flipped or the Democrats could have hold it. And there was only 8 seats up for grabs from the Republicans. So they had only a chance to win in 8 states basically and get another seat. And most of those states were deep red states. So it was almost impossible for the Democrats to actually get a blue wave in the Senate. And the election basically got what people expected. They got the House back, but the Senate is still Republican and is a little bit more Republican now than it was before.
Yeah, exactly. So should we?
Well, one of the most interesting election I think we all talked about. We also talked about it last week was Ted Cruz versus Beto O'Rourke in Texas.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and basically, it was a close race between those 2 candidates, and that's because Texas has historically been a Republican state, firm Republican state, and to actually have an election this close was, you couldn't have thought about it even a year ago, to be honest.
Mm. And Beto O'Rourke, he lost by a little under 3 points.
Yeah, 2.6.
Yeah, 2.6. So basically a 2.5 point difference between Ted Cruz and Beto O'Rourke. And that's a huge milestone and might even indicate that if this continues and they get candidates like Beto O'Rourke in Texas, Texas might, in the not so distant future, be a swing state or purple state, as you call it, like Florida is.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, the question is, because it has been noticeable that the younger generation in Texas, like many Republican states, actually are becoming Democratic. I actually talked about with someone from the study, which was really interesting, where she actually explained that there's a lot of Democrats in closets, which means that they're actually keeping it a secret that they're Democratic to the parents, and there's a whole generation of those people. So the premise is that if you give 4-6 years, or just going forward in time, you're probably gonna recognize, you're probably gonna see that some of these states that were formerly from Republican are gonna switch over to Democrats. Yeah. Because of the younger generation actually more appeal to the Democrats.
And also because of a lot of demographic shifting in Texas. There's a lot of Hispanic in Texas, and I mean a lot, because most people who come to America from Latin America, they normally don't go that much further up in America, in north of America. They basically stay down in the south because it's some of the first states they come to. And it's close to it's for example close to Mexico if they come from Mexico, so it's easier for them to maybe visit family and so on. So because of this shifting demographic in Texas, and Latino mostly voting for Democrats, that also has a huge impact on the way Texas is going in the future. And if you look at the map, basically all the big cities were going to Democrats, which is normal in America. Most rural areas is going to Republicans.
Yeah. I believe was it the city of Houston who last time they had an election, they voted for Ted Cruz, but this time it shifted towards the Democratic Party and actually.
Beto Walkie won the Houston district with 58% of the votes, and Ted Cruz got 41.3% of the votes.
Yeah, and I believe that some of the news stations commented on it as being a stronghold for the Republican Party, and all of a sudden it just shifted to blue. And I just thought that is not much of a stronghold. And so
I think it has to do with what Denne were talking about.
Exactly.
With the people, secret Democrats who do maybe even.
I like to call them closet Democrats.
Yeah, closet Democrats. That's fair enough.
Closet Democrats.
But maybe they're too scared to get out to vote, because there's also this idea that Texas is such a solid red state that it's sort of pointless to go out and vote, because people always expecting it to be Republican. So in some sense, your vote doesn't really matter if you do not believe that you can win the state anyways.
Yeah.
So it just have to be a lot of people has to go out and vote, and Houston is a big city. So the voter, I do not have the numbers, but I will assume that the voter turnout was a lot higher in cities in this election than it had been in other Senate elections.
Yeah, one of the things I also found very fascinating was that she actually told me, the one I was talking about with these closet Democrats, that it was actually such a secret that if they actually revealed the secret, they probably wouldn't even, the parents would probably cut them off, like, you can't have anything to do with our family. And that really speaks to the ultra partisanship in the US. It's pretty remarkable, also because when you think about this particular person, it's like it's pretty how do you say, paradoxical, because she doesn't strike me as a Republican, none so ever. But because she has a host family from the U.S. in Texas, that's all the reasons she had to actually vote Republican. And I really think this highlights the ultra partisanship in the U.S.
But that can also be that a lot of we have talked about the idea that the younger generation have a very low turnout when it comes to voting in general. And maybe the fact that Trump has been elected as president, and the idea that more and more younger people start to get into politics, maybe those two things provide them with the confidence to go out and sort of wouldn't say justify their ideas and opinions on these matters, but maybe give them the confidence to go out and vote for themselves and not for what their parents and their generation in the past have voted for. And that is actually, I didn't know that that was these closet Democrats, but it is an interesting idea and an interesting concept to look for in the future voter turnouts.
Yeah, whether it stays blue with the younger generations.
Yeah.
Like you said with Trump, I definitely think that a lot of, especially younger people who were really shocked that Trump would actually win the presidential election in 2016 and somehow got motivated to maybe I should go out and vote. My vote actually means more than expected.
Exactly.
And well, if you look at the voter turnout in 2014, the last midterm election, it was 110 million. Was 13 or 30 million less voters than in 2018, and there was 110 million that voted this time. And normally midterms, there's not a lot of people who are voting. That's basically a fact in US in general when it comes to voting, because they have to vote all the time on all sorts of things. They vote on mayor, judge, sheriff, and so on. But in this aspect, there was a lot of more people voting in this midterm than usually, because normally it's under 50% of people voting in midterms. I believe it's like 57 or around 60% voting in the general election and in the presidential election.
Yeah.
So
that is scary to think that there's not a lot of voter turnout and not a lot of people showing support actually for the democratic process.
I also think it has something to do with the skepticism of the vote.
Yeah.
Because one of the things I realized, if anyone has bought the Red Dead Redemption 2, and it's a pretty remarkable game because they are also pretty precise in how things were during the late 1890s, I think.
Yeah, late 19th century and early 20th century.
Yeah, where the whole thing was, if you played the game, you know that with the protagonist you encounter some early feminists during that time, where they're actually fighting for the vote, and the protagonist, he's pretty like skeptical about these women fighting for the vote, not because they're women and they want the vote, but that they actually want to vote. It's the whole vote itself that is.
Why do you want to vote?
Yeah,
because
why do you want
does
to vote?
It even matter in the whole perspective of the political process? And you could say that is actually a very interesting point, because you could relate that to sort of where the politicians sort of get their votes from, because a lot of people in states like California, their votes doesn't count because they have, what is it, around in the electoral college they have 50, 55, 52 votes. So it doesn't exactly represent the whole state's population, so a lot of votes are not exactly that important. They lose a lot of these positions or these votes.
Yeah, that's in the general election.
That is in the general elections.
Where the winner takes it all, and it's basically you just need one vote more than your opposition, and you basically get all the votes, all the electoral
in the whole state,
electoral college from that state.
Yeah, so a lot of votes sort of 55. But the idea is that, as we also touched upon with this midterm election, showing that a state like Texas actually was close. I would say they were close to getting
they were close,
democratic.
Really close.
Yeah.
Why do you think? Because we had actually a little discussion of what do you think about Beto O'Rourke, how he maybe could have won, or.
So, first of all, my idea was that sort of maybe a lot of the reasons why he became popular in this election was that he sort of was not a extreme on the left, but he was more of a center player, which could how can you explain this in some kind of...
But you mean that if he was more centrist because he was extremely left?
Yeah, but he had some of these talking points that I believe that was... I saw a clip where he said that we have to take care of the veterans, which is something that a lot of Republicans sort of tend to express.
That's basically all Americans.
Yeah, but he used a lot of the rhetoric that a lot of Republicans sort of goes to speak of in the elections. It is a talking point that Trump also have talked about, that veterans should be the main focus of when they come home. They gotta have good provide good support for these people, and a lot of veterans tend to pick up on this notion that Trump wanted them, not wanted them, but he had focus on them. And I believe that the reason why he got a lot of, because I believe that he got a lot of these Republican voters shifted towards him, was because he used some of the rhetoric, usually affiliated with a lot of resonating in a lot of Republican voters.
I get what you mean. I don't necessarily agree because the way I see it, Beto O'Rourke was an extremely left candidate. He was more in the Bernie Sanders camp than in the Hillary Clinton camp, what I would say is a centrist.
Yeah.
But the thing about, especially your example, might not be the best example either, because nobody is going to, in American politics, say, I'm against veteran healthcare or against veterans living on the streets.
No,
that would be a death sentence.
Against it's mainly where you place the importance of these individual topics. So would you place it at the top 5 important topics, or in the lower bottom 10 or something like that? But yeah, so. I didn't research a lot of his main topics, where what he went on to what he stood for in some kind of sense, but because I thought I wouldn't go into a lot of details with this position, because I saw the polling and it said like, oh, don't worry, Ted Cruz is gonna get all the votes, and he's not even gonna be near Ted Cruz. And all of a sudden, he just in the early voter counts, he was in front, and I thought this. Oh wait, this gonna be interesting.
Well, O'Rourke was in front.
Yeah, he was in front in the first part of the. So yeah, just.
I would say that I believe the reason he did so well was because, and this might sound counterintuitive, but he was a left candidate in Texas. And that's basically what we talk about when we talk about the ballot initiative. When you are talking about the specific issues, Americans are mostly on the left side when it comes to things like healthcare and even gun control. He was even pro-gun control. I do not know how much that will do in, for example, Texas, which is a very pro-gun state. But still, most Americans, they believe in some common sense gun control. They don't see it as, even though that a lot of the framing is that just a universal background check is going to take your guns away. That's not what it is, and most Americans knows that's not what it is. But that's how it's going to be framed.
Yeah, exactly.
So he campaigned on a lot of left issues, also for economics. He was talking about more about boosting the economy for small businesses, which also is, you can say, is a Republican talking point, but when you look at what they're actually doing in the legislative branch, they're normally almost always doing tax cuts for big multi-corporations instead of small businesses. And especially as we're talking about, healthcare was the most important topic in this election. I believe that is the way to win a state, but you could also say that you have, like in what is West Virginia, you got a Democrat like Joe Manchin, who's basically a blue dog Democrat, who's more conservative than he's actually a Democrat.
Yeah.
And he also won that weighs pretty big over his Republican counterpart. But that's probably also to do with some identity politics, where he actually voted for Kavanaugh, the Supreme Court nominee. Trump did. He was the only Democrat who voted for him to be appointed. So there's a lot of... I think when it goes down to it, I actually think most Americans agree on a lot of the issues, but they always focus on these fights where there is a disagreement, where it becomes this identity politics. And a person like Beto O'Rourke, I think he has a pretty big future in American politics. He might run against Senator Cruz in 6 years. He might run as president in 2020. People have talked about. There's a lot of things that can happen, and I believe that Texas is going to, or America in general, is going to change a lot. But I don't believe you can be a conservative Democrat and believe you can win over a Republican. Because if you are a conservative Democrat, why would you vote for someone who's a Democrat running on conservative values when you can just vote on the real conservative? It doesn't really make sense.
I could see that. Yeah,
you're basically just voting for someone, but saying they're conservative instead of just voting somebody who is actually conservative. You will always go for Republicans. I would say
one could argue that as a more centered candidate could be more interesting for a person who is in the middle and doesn't know if they are going to switch to a Democrat or they're going to stay Republican. Not just on the things they go to election they stand for at the elections, but just in general. If you have a person who like Denne said, for generations just have voted Republican just because their family did, or just because it was the familiar party, if a candidate which is more centered, which you just said that he was not actually centered at all.
He was very left.
He was very left, yeah. Then I would say that then it's Texas, actually, as you said, that is shifting. People are... the whole idea that Texas is this stronghold for Republicans, conservative Republicans, like many news stations said that Houston was... if Houston shifted... that would mean that Texas had the possibility of shifting, and they sort of had. They shifted this midterm election, Houston, that is. So, yeah, that was a lot of talk about the states, senators, one of what we were probably also all a little bit disappointed that Ted Cruz didn't get out of Senate, because he's one of the most loathsome candidates in the Senate. Even Republicans don't like him. But it was a long shot, but Beto O'Rourke, he came close. Maybe next time. Maybe next time.
But one of the other things that was also up for election was, of course, a lot of governors in a lot of states. And there were two races where it was extremely close and people probably followed them most. That was Florida and Georgia. And we actually do not know exactly who is going to be the governor there anymore, because there's a lot of voting problems, as there always is in Florida, and there was a lot of voting suppression in Georgia. It seems like it will be... It would seem like it will be Republicans who's taking Georgia and Florida, but it's up to a recount at the moment, because it's such a close race, and it seems like there have been some problem with the way votes have been counted and so on. So we do not exactly know how the race is going to turn out. So
how is what is in just to sort of explain the role of the governor. Because, as we talked about, for example, the role of the governor in a state like Georgia, which amazed me going into the midterm, is actually that a lot of the registration for voting goes through the governor's office. and there has been some controversy surrounding the position of the governor in the voting process, because they are recounting a lot of votes which they thought to be purged in some kind of way.
Well, I'm not. I haven't went deep down into it, but one of the things that Governor Kemp did, he removed the voting rights from, I believe it was around 80,000 people, or maybe 100,000 people or something.
Yeah.
And that's because he's a governor and he controls how voting areas and so on, as he is the leader of the state, so he is basically it's a little bit difficult to explain, but that's the thing with America. It is 50 states, and every state has their own laws and their own state laws and their own government in itself, and that's the state governor, and the governor is the leader of the state. So in some way you can see it like every state is their own country, and then the governor might be the prime minister, but federal law still overrides state laws.
Yeah.
And that's it's a bit complex and probably a topic we could go into in deeper details in some way. But the easiest way to describe it for people who are not in America is probably where you got a prime minister, that's the governor, and then you got the president is basically the leader of the EU. But even then, there's a lot of differences.
Yeah, it's just a very American thing that they have such a high hierarchy, if to say so.
Yeah.
I mean, they even do it in sports, where they just make everything as a round of 16 so complicated with Western Conference, Eastern Conference, instead of calling quarterfinals and everything. It's just there's a whole lot of hierarchy into it in a typical American way.
But that's also because this entire idea of the founding, where should you have more state rights or should you have more federal control? Because it is the United States of America. It's not America, just North America. It is a lot of states that have been united to one big country. But when going back to the Kemp thing, he basically took the voting from a lot of people, because some people sometimes move out of the state, some people die, so of course it doesn't make sense that they're still on the voting ballot. But if they have moved out or they have died, especially they can't vote anyways. But he basically just took away a lot of these people, and most of them were in areas where it would be Democratic, Democrats who had been voted. So he basically just took them away, so they did not have time to sign up to vote again in this midterm election. And that's basically you can call it voter suppression. Some people call it voter fraud. But because he's the leader of this entire state, he basically has the authority to do these things.
Yeah, and really ties into the whole thing about the one party trying to suppress the other. It basically is, and we just see it also, like we talked about with the Supreme Court. It also happens at these levels of governors. So very notable, the silver lining.
Yeah, and but it is also some of the reasons why they are sort of not done counting the amount of voters, because they sort of. They're sort of recounting a lot of these fields. Exact. Also,
it's so close they have to recount it.
Yeah, I believe the margin between was it in Florida? It wasn't that much, so they had to.
It's under 40,000 people.
Yeah, so it's almost nothing, right?
That's almost nothing.
Yeah.
Even a small difference of voter fraud.
Yeah,
it's about 8 million people.
Overturn it.
Yeah, exactly. So they have to go on and start a recount of the vote just to make sure. And I actually read on The Guardian that what is his name, Rick Scott, which was one of the candidate for the Republicans. He started a counter lawsuit against the people doing the recounts, saying that the Democrats were out to sort of committing voter fraud.
I was when you were talking about the Senate ways at the moment.
Okay,
I was looking at the governor. It's even closer there. It is under 15,000 votes.
Okay,
so it's 0.2% of in the Senate ways it's 0.2%, and in the governor is 0.3% or 5%.
Okay, so it's on 4%. both levels. It's
extremely close.
Extremely close.
Yeah,
that's why it's so remarkable that this recounting might do a whole lot of change.
Yeah, it might change things.
So we actually,
both Senate and governor positions.
Yeah,
and especially when we're talking about the governor, it has a lot of importance for other election because they are the people who are leading the administration who's going to draw the district. And in 2020, there's going to be a new census. And for people who do not know what a census is, that every 10 years in America, they are making a census where they are putting out flyers to every single American citizen to basically count how many American citizens there are. And this census is important to know how many electoral voters, or what's called
electoral votes.
Votes you have in a state because with the House because of how many population there are and so on. And it will give an idea of how many people are living in this state and how many people are living in America overall. And because the governors has control over who is making the districts, they can basically try to draw the district in their favor, which is basically called gerrymandering. And it's a big issue in America and also a way to make some votes count more than others, and that's also a pretty complicated issue we do not have time to go into in this.
No, we could talk
episode.
like forever about gerrymandering and how it affects elections in general, how this idea of drawing districts to sort of suppress, maybe. No,
I mean,
not
it
exactly
is
suppress, but it is to sort of make sure that the part that votes for your party is in the majority in that district.
Well, it is suppressing. It's suppressing the voters on the other side.
Yeah,
I mean, it's just a way to get an advantage.
I mean, to give an idea of what gerrymandering can do, you can have a district where, let's say, it's 60% Democratic and 40% Republican voters. It's actually possible, if it's a Republican who's drawing the district, to actually win the election, so it will get more seats in Congress, even though that more people voted for Democrats. And that's because of this gerrymandering where you draw the district, so you put all the Democratic district into one district, all the voters into one district, and then you take some of the swing votes and only put a little bit of the Democrats in and some Republicans. So if you have 5 districts, you can win for Republican, even though it's 60-40. You can get 3 districts that's Republican and 2 districts that's Democratic, even though that they got less votes overall.
Yeah,
that's gerrymandering.
Exactly. Yeah, it's crazy, and we can't really relate to it in the same way here in Denmark. Or
you can't really fathom how sometimes things can really get out of. Really get corrupt, especially in American politics, where if you're from Europe, it's not. You can't really you can't really understand how it can happen. You can take it for granted.
Exactly. So yeah, that was all we sort of wanted to talk about
in terms of the midterm.
In terms of the midterm elections and how it went on. Sort of ending conclusion. What did you think about the sort of, as you sat there and watched the midterm elections?
I gotta be honest, I thought it was incredibly boring.
Yeah.
Because it basically just everything that people expected happened. Democrats won the House. They lost a couple of seats in the Senate. They won some of these big upwards where you thought maybe Beto O'Rourke would going to win over Ted Cruz, and some of these massive things where I thought that I didn't expect that. It basically just went as people expected it to go. So. Yeah. It was kind of boring, and because of how, as we talked about, that's probably not going to happen a whole lot in the next 2 years. So I believe if you are very interested in American politics, the next 2 years is going to be incredibly boring until the next presidential election.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree on a lot of that, especially in the part of how interesting American politics will be in the next couple of years. You could say that in short, one could just look forward to 2020 and see what exciting stuff is going to happen in American politics in that time.
Yeah, for me, I think it was a bit more interesting because it's the first time ever I actually followed it live, the midterm elections, to actually see how it happens. It was a kind of thrilling for me, but in terms of what I expected, nothing much. I mean, it was everything that I expected, especially when you people try to...
dissect it. Then it became clear that, okay, the Democrats going to win the House, but lose the Senate. But I think the overall conclusion for me is that I have this feeling that it seems like the Democrats does have the advantage moving forward. It really seems that way, especially because of how these young people are more appealed to the Democrats rather than the Republicans.
I just got an update from one of the races I actually was kind of close in the House with Richard Ojeda. I don't remember if I talked about it last podcast, but he was running in the 3rd District of West Virginia, and he was an extremely, what you can call, populist left candidate in an extremely Trump area. Trump won this district with over 40 points difference over his candidate in 2016, and he lost it around 10 or 13 points. I just gotten a message that he's now running for president.
He has announced
he's running for president in 2020. I don't know if he can get enough name recognition to get up there, but if he can, he's going to be an interesting character to look forward to. The best way to describe Richard Ojeda is that he's basically like Donald Trump, but on the left.
Okay.
So he has all these left-leaning policy ideas, a little like Bernie, but not as left as Bernie. But his rhetoric and his way of talking is basically like Trump.
Okay.
That
sounds interesting.
Yeah. I'm going to
see how that's going to turn out. That's going to be interesting.
Yeah.
But we also got a question this week again. And,
once again.
We decided that when we're going to get the question, we're going to get our producer Rasmus to read it for us and then answer it. It was from Leon again. Again, thank you for the question.
Shout out.
And,
so here goes the question. He writes, thanks for discussing my question and thanks for keeping up the good work. Got 2 more questions for you if they are of interest. The first question is, you may answer this yourself honestly. Since the midterm election is right around the corner, what are some of the things America's president has done so far that you find to be smart, bold, successful, apprehended, faulty, or misguided? Things like pressuring China and Russia into a new weapons deal, creating conflict with North Korea, or revamping the trade deal with the EU. And the second question is, Mexico has recently stated a migrant caravan funded by the Venezuelan government, with the numbers estimated to be over thousands. In preparation, the U.S. has sent over 5,000 soldiers to the Mexican border that already has over 2,000 National Guards. Additionally, armed Texans are gathering a militia to aid the soldiers meet the caravan. Considering the immigration crisis Europe is still recovering from, what are your thoughts on the whole ordeal? And of course, your thoughts on how well it is being handled. And after all, more could happen in the coming days.
So we wanted to start with the second question first, right?
Yeah.
We said that also because it plays into the whole run up to the midterm elections. We had some ideas of why the caravan became such a
big issue.
Yeah, heated topic, mostly on one side. And I know, Bubba, you had some ideas which you stated in pre-recording.
Yeah,
about the caravan.
Just to clarify what Leon is talking about, is a caravan coming from Honduras up to United States to seek asylum. It's around 5,000 people. And in response, Trump is going to send 25,000 troops down to I don't know, meet them or greet them or whatever you could basically intimidate them when they're coming. And it has been a huge issue up to the midterm from especially right-wing media and also Donald Trump, who called it an invasion and all sorts of things. And it has basically been so politicized that they wanted to make this fear tactic that he basically also did in the 2016 election. So people would go out to vote in fear of this migrant caravan. And we have to think about it's only 5,000 people. They're coming to seek asylum. And there's 320 million people or something in America. It's an absurd to call it an invasion, and it's absurd to say it's such a big issue. It's all politics to get people out to vote in the midterm. And if you look at the news today and in the coming weeks, because the caravan has not even arrived to American soil yet, it's only coming in the next few weeks or maybe a month or so.
Yeah, I believe I heard something about the Mexicans saying that they would not grant passage to the caravan, but I can't say if they are actually at this point moving through Mexico, because I read I believe it was in the Atlantic that the caravan was apprehended at the Mexican border, and Mexico was sort of joining the U.S. in apprehending this caravan, but once again, I agree with you on the idea that the caravan was sort of a media stunt on the more Republican-leaning.
Mostly stuff like Fox News.
Fox News, yeah,
definitely
went on to call it an invasion and say that mainly Trump went back to his 2016 rhetoric, saying that these people are coming and invading our country and making everything unsafe and bringing drugs, and even Islamic terrorists at one point that they were hiding between the children and the women. And
everyone knows the Muslims are hiding in Honduras.
Yeah.
They even said something like they are bringing diseases like, I don't know, some diseases that have been extinct for a lot of years. Have like
everything. They brought everything with them.
Measles.
Yeah.
So
these 5,000 people.
So it's basically a political topic that bring up under the midterm. And if you're looking at the news today and the coming weeks, we're probably not going to talk about it that much anymore because the midterm is over. So that's just how politics is in America.
That's how extreme it could get, over as little as 5,000 people. I mean, try and think about it. 5,000 people in Denmark isn't much at all. It's not.
No.
It's incredible.
In a country where most of the landmass is not that populated.
Yeah, exactly.
You have so much land that is just, it is not everything. Every aspect of the American countryside is not exactly lucrative to many people.
No.
But between 5,000 and 7,000, I believe it was that number between someone. Yeah, I can't see that as an invasion of the United States.
I can't even see it as a big problem.
No, it's not an invasion that's going to be very successful, I can imagine.
No. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, also just sending 25,000 military troops to get them when we come there, it's absurd. Yeah. I mean, what are they going to do if they don't have guns?
Yeah. So I believe that the question Leon asked also put it in contrast to the migrant crisis we had in Europe. I don't believe that the two of them can be.
Not at all.
No, that you can't compare them in the same to the same extent, because the migrant crisis we talked about.
That was massive.
That was massive. The amount of people fleeing to Europe was are just so as
staggering.
Yeah, exactly.
Think about Germany, who took in about 800,000.
Millions.
Yeah,
I believe they touched upon a million.
Maybe it was but close to around a million
we're
people.
Gonna take
and they are a much smaller country than America, and they're talking about 5,000 people and they're in a red alert.
Yeah,
you cannot compare them to it. It's not the same thing.
Not at all.
So I believe that to sort of conclude the whole caravan aspect, we're not going to hear about it in the next couple of months after this. After the election, it is out of the media's interest.
Yeah.
And we just we think it was a media stunt.
I mean, I wouldn't even say think. I mean, pretty sure is the right word, because it's so. I mean, I'm just surprised that. Sometimes I can really be surprised over how much they're gonna make a big fuss out of everything.
Yeah,
I would say it's borderline fake news.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it is kind of fake news when you say this is where it's just crossed the line. Where saying when the Fox News are saying there are Muslim terrorists in these caravans, they're from Honduras. Come on. I mean, already there, you just know the agenda.
What is this? It was sponsored by the Venezuelan government.
Yeah, Venezuelan government.
I don't believe. I don't even believe that.
No, but just to imagine that could be what some of the media and the politicians could say. It just plays into the whole idea that it's not that big of a fuss.
It was just creating a burning platform of everything they could just put into this caravan, and they could panic people. That was it.
And then get them out to vote.
Yeah.
But in terms of the other question you had, any thoughts of President Trump, what he have done of good thing, abhorrent thing, or anything at all?
I would say that we have touched a little upon it in this podcast, but the idea that it's not as much what he have done himself as a president, but actually what he have brought forth in people. So he actually, with his actions, pushed a lot of, as we mentioned before, young people out to vote. But if we should mention just maybe some of the things that he had done himself, in the beginning of his presidency, I thought it was thought-provoking and interesting that he brought forth the idea of NATO and rethinking NATO and the 2% of the nation's GDP going to the military, because it's in the articles of the NATO Accords that every member of the NATO agreement should reach a 2% GDP, meaning that from what the nation, the member nation produces, and what they, it's technical stuff.
Gross national income.
Yeah, gross national income. 2% of that income should go towards military spending, and I actually thought that he had something. Right there.
He had a point.
He had a point. And that is not something everyone can say about Trump, that he's actually making a point. Because my idea of America is that they should lower their military spending, because right now it's, what is it?
It's absurd how high it is.
Yeah, they have more military spending what the 13 next countries, nations
having together,
and 10 of them are like NATO allies.
Yeah.
So America should sort of lower their military spending, and I believe that other NATO members should actually increase their military spending to reach that 2% GDP, because that would mean that America isn't this solo player, and that the cooperation between NATO states could be achieved.
And this was something Trump proposed.
It was something he talked about because
he talked about it.
He had increased the military budget
Yeah, okay.
with a lot of more billions and billions of dollars. But I agree with Casper. I also think it's kind of absurd that we see America as the world police, and at the same time we are blaming him for going into all these conflicts. I mean, yeah,
It has never worked out well when they're hypersensitive of everything that goes around in the world. It usually hasn't.
If I have to give credit for something Trump has done, is that he called the Trans-Pacific Partnership of the TPP. I'm not going to go into the specific of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Personally, I'm not an expert, and almost nobody is, because it's something which was in the news in the 2014-15, and it's very complicated. But beside that, I think Trump has been a horrible president. Yeah. I mean, the trade wars he have done, yes, you can say the trade war on steel from China has helped some steel manufacturers in America, but he have made a huge crisis for the automobile and other industries who are using steel, because it has been a lot more expensive to buy. Also, the way he treats immigrants or asylum seekers and taking away their children and putting them in cages and in prisons, and then some of these children are so young that when they are getting reunited with their families, they are traumatized, and some of them can't even remember their parents.
Yeah.
So I think he has been a horrible president.
You could say on the whole moving industry back to America aspect, or this trade war he's starting to, or he has at least started. From what we know, it's not what the world should be moving towards.
And it doesn't work.
And it doesn't work, no.
If you're making tariffs, which basically making taxes on people's imports from other countries, for example, tariffs on China's steel, they're just doing tariffs on your products as well. So it's going to be more expensive for everyone.
I mean, it's pretty important to remember when he's making these trade wars and saying he will pull jobs back from China to U.S. It's only going to make the resources and the things we as consumers buy more expensive.
Yeah,
there's a reason for why everything that you can actually buy right now is cheap, and that's because how these trades are looking as they do right now, and to actually impose your will on these kind of things, it's pretty dangerous.
Exactly.
Yeah, we are buying cheap raw materials, such as steel and so on, and then we are building cars, iPhones, whatever. I mean, I know iPhones also built in China, but when we are building stuff with these cheap raw materials, that's what's booming the economy.
Yeah.
When we are making trade wars, these cheap raw materials are going to be more expensive.
Yeah.
But you could also say that the whole idea of moving industry back to America, it's not lucrative in the idea that the time when America was this manufacturing of goods like cars and steel and all of this, it was in a time when America was industrializing, and you could say that the reason why they moved all these aspects to China is because America wanted to move towards a more service-minded, focused country industry. So it's kind of like going back in time, where we can talk about, but there's a lot of these blue collar people who just want to work in an industry or factory environment. But then we're going to touch upon the American educational system and how we can. That's a whole other topic we could discuss for hours.
Quickly to finish up my thoughts about Trump is that I can definitely see why the blue working force are worried about how the world is going, but it's not something that they can't stop. It just can't, because, as you say, it's moving back in time.
Yeah.
It really is. And to summarize my thoughts on Trump, he's been fucking horrible. that is the word. And that's what I knew going into it. So it's not a newsflash for me. So,
but Talking about Trump and the midterms, let's end this podcast episode about prediction for the 2020 election.
Yeah.
Any ideas what's going to happen there? Who do you think is going to be a potential candidate? Who might win? Republicans, Democrats?
It's difficult, especially for me sitting here as a. I started this project with saying that I was Republican leaning, but
you're not a Trump supporter.
But I'm not a Trump supporter at all, because many of the things that he says that is going to help the American people or the American industry, I'm not quite sure they are, and I actually believe that a lot of the ideas that he has or is what he is proposing is moving America backwards. So would I like to see a Republican winning the 2020 election? I want to wait to see if there's a better candidates. I would not see Trump sitting as president in 2020, because he did it I believe few days after he winning the election in 2016, announced that he will be running in 2020.
He's already campaigning.
He's almost already campaigning.
His slogan is "Keep America Great 2020."
Yeah.
It's not even a joke; it's true.
So basically, my predictions are gonna wait until we have some candidates on the Republican side.
What about the Democrats? Who do you think is going to win?
I actually think that it's very interesting to follow on what Bernie Sanders is saying, because a lot of what he's saying is the whole aspect of the bank industry and the idea that the minimum wage should be raised to, what is it? $15. I have this whole idea that he is moving towards better solutions right now, but I can't once again I can't exactly predict.
Well, then let me come with my prediction, because I even have a bet with Casper.
Yeah.
And there is a caveat in our bet, because this is a huge if. I believe that Bernie Sanders is going to win the presidency in 2020.
Yeah.
But it only determines if he actually is going to win. That's the only thing that I can imagine that he's not going to win, because he is the most popular candidate in America at the moment, and a lot of people is subscribing to his platform. So if Bernie Sanders is going to win in 2020, and just the primary, he doesn't have to be the general, just in the primary, I have a bet with Casper that he's going to win the entire general election and be the next president.
Yeah.
Else, other bets I will have is probably Elizabeth Warren could be a good candidate if Bernie doesn't win and she decides to run for president. A lot of people say Kamala Harris. It might be a possibility. Beto O'Rourke is also a new person people are talking about at the moment. But my bet will still be on Bernie Sanders, because I believe he is going to win. And if he's going to win, I'm pretty certain he's going to win.
Yeah, as the way it looks right now, it really seems like he is the candidate who is most prominent going toward 2020.
But we did see that an article today that Hillary Clinton, her top 8 is saying she's going to win again in 2020. Well, so who knows? Hillary Trump 2020?
No. Well, she already fucked him once, why not twice? But I mean,
just short note: if you can lose to Donald Trump, don't.
And especially. I mean, Beto O'Rourke really looks promising in the way that he has risen to prominence in Texas. So, but I'm going with Bernie, and my personal favorite, because I really do think that he has the right mindset. I mean, I will always have respect for someone who's actually was in the civil rights movement and actually helped this thing.
He even got arrested for protesting in the civil rights movement.
Yeah. So this is really someone who has an interesting character, and the way he has risen through politics, I think it's a really interesting story, because he is one of those, as he describes himself, as he wasn't looking he wasn't thinking in his 20s and 30s or 40s that how can I become the next president of the US. It just kind of happened to him.
But okay, of course, I'm completely biased because I'm a huge Bernie Sanders fan, I would more say, because I'm not really doing anything to support him. But as you said, Dennis, that's also what I love about Bernie Sanders, that he had the same platform for the last 30 years. He doesn't just change his platform as the political winds changes, as Hillary Clinton is a prime example of. He has the same. He believed in gay rights back in the early 90s.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at Hillary, she only believed in the gay rights activism in 2013 or 14 when it was becoming a trend. So she's this wave rider that I have no respect for, and the way that she just swept the election under Bernie, I just find her utterly disgusting, to be honest.
Hillary 2020, let's try again.
Let's try again.
Yeah, and I think
maybe that's gonna
what we have for the moment, right?
Yeah. I just thought about the title for her next book.
What was that?
I tried again. Something like that.
I failed again.
I failed again. Or What Happened 2.0 or something.
She made
like
domesticated Bill Clinton after Monica Lewinsky. But she can't do the same to the Americans. I mean, the Americans have lost their faith in her.
Yeah,
let's just say that.
She would do more harm than good.
Yeah,
if she.
Well, and before we wrap this up, remember that you can ask us questions on our fan page on YouTube and SoundCloud, where you can comment, and it usually make the podcast that more interesting when we get these questions. So please do leave a comment, and we hope you'll listen to us on our next episode.